I think that we can start.
Yeah.
And we can do a quick introduction of this this webinar. This webinar is organized by Ingegneria Senza Frontiere Firenze, an association that is working on various thematics, but I won't do it very long because it is late. So I start to present the webinar. This webinar is the second part of. Sorry. Okay, this webinar is the second part of a series of webinars about South America and Latin America and resources, water consumption and environmental issues in Southern America. And tonight we will have as speakers Angela Salinas, who, a Bolivian engineer that is an expert about the issues related to water sanification, and Denise Roca Servat, that is a Colombian professor. And now we can start, and we give the speech to our first speaker, Angela Salinas, and to her presentation. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much. And sorry for the delay. I don't know why we had some technical problems. It always happens when you're in a hurry, maybe. So if you can help me, please, to share the presentation. I want to thank Ingegneria Senza Frontiere for the invitation to present a bit of the work I have been doing in Bolivia for the past 5 years, related to water management with emphasis in wastewater treatment. So my name is Angela Salinas. I currently work as a project coordinator of the supervision team for the construction of Puchucoyo wastewater treatment plant, which is a plant located in the city of El Alto in Bolivia. El Alto is a twin city of La Paz, and it has more than 1 million inhabitants, so it's a very important plant. But the work that I want to share with you today is more related to a planning process that we carry out. We're working with the IDB Bank in Bolivia and also with the Ministry of Environment and Water in Bolivia. So the content I show you, you can see it on your screens. The content is related to a planning process that we did in Bolivia to draw up a national policy related to wastewater treatment management. So until 2015, the visibility given to wastewater treatment in Bolivia was very low. And the work we did tried to reverse this situation, to have a goal to create a national strategy for wastewater treatment, to be the main policy to be followed at a national level. So you can see on your screen a bit of the background of and underlying of the problem for wastewater treatment in Bolivia. I show some images of what the main consequences were as the severe pollution of the water bodies through the whole country, and that produces a considerable ecological impact and also a public health concern, because much of this wastewater was used also for agriculture. And on the third picture, you can see actually an emissary that the community made a hole before going through the wastewater treatment plant, so they had irrigation for their crops. So the problem was very severe. And in the next slide, you can see what were the numbers of the situation in the country. we started the thinking process to develop a national strategy for wastewater treatment and by 2015, as I said. And by that year, we had this data that I show on your screens. Drinking water coverage had just reached the desired objectives according to MDGs, so the MDGs that we're planning for 2015. However, sanitation at a national level did not exceed 57%. So we were lagging very, very behind in sanitation coverage. And also we did the research on wastewater treatment, and we found that the coverage, we didn't have the exact data, but we estimated that the coverage and the percentages in the different population segments were a percentage of more or less 31% of treated wastewater in Bolivia. Added to this situation, we also had some indicators related to the lack of adequate sanitation in the country. As you saw, more than 5.35 million cases of diseases treated due to the lack of sanitation just by the year 2014. We're just talking about 1 year here in Bolivia. We also had around 250 recorded deaths on vulnerable population in Bolivia, and losses of more than $1,000 million, which represented a 4% of the GDP in the country. So by 2015, we also didn't know how many wastewater treatment plants we had in Bolivia. What was the population served with these wastewater treatment plants, and what was the operational status of these wastewater treatment plants? We didn't have also the information about the mechanisms of operation and maintenance on these wastewater treatment plants, and we didn't have a lot of data like the lifespan of the infrastructure or the condition of this infrastructure. Can we go to the next one, please? The next one. So we also were very aware that the discharge of effluents in most of the cases in the country were below the quality limits established by environmental regulations. And then in very few cases, service providers were keeping an adequate records of the performance of the wastewater treatment plant. Besides this situation, we also had to deal with another source of pollution, as you can see, related with fecal sludge from on-site systems. Because before we were just talking about the conventional sewage, but we also have a large percentage of communities that, and also peri-urban areas that work with on-site system. So just in the case of Santa Cruz de la Sierra, which is the biggest city in Bolivia, there were reports of an estimated amount of more than 1,000 households that worked with septic tanks and boreholes, of which just 15% more or less had an adequate operation and maintenance per year. So very few of the systems were properly operating. And just we had one wastewater treatment plant for the discharge of this collected sludge. Regarding to final disposal and reuse of the sludge and wastewater produced in these systems, we have a non-existent reuse of final disposal. So in Bolivia, we saw that also fecal sludge handling is another source of concern. It's carried out a handling rather than a management in the country itself. And because we think that management involves more aspects than just the sanitation change, no? And it involves also the aspects of administration, planning, social and environmental management, and also capacity building for the sustainability of the service. In addition to that, the imaginary of wastewater treatment in Bolivia was as shown, with a level of treatment that only reached a secondary or a biological treatment, with zero sludge management. So that small frame is what it's usually considered to be a wastewater treatment in Bolivia. So we really don't think about what to do with biogas. We don't think what to do with reuse. We don't have system with tertiary treatment. So the situation was really very critical at that point. So with all this background and these issues that I show you, we were from the Ministry of Environment and Water in Bolivia, and after different national workshops with sector experts, we decided to launch a consultancy work for a national inventory of wastewater treatment plants, which also served as a baseline of the knowledge of the situation of wastewater treatment in Bolivia. So the idea of this national inventory was to collect information related to wastewater treatment in Bolivia in all the communities with more than 100 inhabitants. The idea was first focused more on the urban area, but it also was decided later to include a small percentage of the rural area. So for the water and sanitation sector in Bolivia, all populations or all communities equal or less than 2,000 that have equal or less than 2,000 inhabitants are considered rural. So the work was divided according to a number of communities, and also we had the priority to get the indicators of a technical, economical, environmental, and social order. Next one, please. Thank you. So for the data collection of this work, survey files were filled out. So you can see more or less the type of surveys we did for this work, which were structured as follow. You can see on the top part that we have a space for general data of the wastewater treatment plant. This was a general data for the community we visited. So we were putting a code, the name of the community, which was the ecological zone of this community, the number of projected inhabitants of the community. We have a separate sector also for the data of the wastewater treatment plants. So in that sector, we asked about the population served with the wastewater treatment plant, the core technology of this plant, the operational status, and also we have some part of the surveys for the data related to flow rates and water monitoring in the plant, in wastewater treatment plants. And also the condition of the different facilities at the wastewater treatment plant, for example, emissary, pre-treatment, primary treatment, secondary, tertiary, etc., etc. And finally, we also were investigated in the effluent discharge. So what was the receiving body of these discharges after the wastewater treatment plant, if this effluent was used or not on irrigation, and also some of the characteristics of this reuse. The national inventory not only intended to assess wastewater treatment systems, but as you can see, we also were checking the drinking water systems itself. So, in order to have a comprehensive evaluation of the water services as a whole, so it was also required to know the conditions of the drinking water systems and the sanitary systems. So for the drinking water systems, we also check on the source of water, the consumption of the different communities, the percentage coverage, the continuity of the service, and also the conditions of the facilities. Besides that, we also check on the service provider capacity to provide water in 20 years. And the same work was done for sewerage. So also we were checking on the different communities, the percentage, the coverage percentage for sewerage system, if this community has a storm drain system as combined or separate from the sewerage system, the number of connections we have, the population served, the year of construction, commissioning, etc., etc. And finally, we also check on some data about quality of wastewater going in and going out of wastewater treatment plants, as you can see in the next slide. So whenever possible, we collected data given by the service provider. For example, some analyses that are made that they take longer time, as the BOD or the total nitrogen or phosphorus. But also we measure some other parameters as COD, dissolved oxygen, total suspended solids. So we had more or less the characteristics of the different effluents and affluents of the wastewater treatment plants of the different communities. So next, we have, after all this data, of this collection of the data was systematized in order to show results that support decision-making for the most urgent works to be carried out by the national government. This slide shows the representativeness of the data collected in the field. At the population level, by 2016, various communities that represent 68% of the population in Bolivia were visited. The pending percentage, showing the small lead colored portion that you can see as 1.9, was not visited, although it was planned at the beginning, but we couldn't visit those communities because we checked in advance that these communities did not have water, even a very simple drinking water system, or where the information gathering was very, very difficult due to the impossibility to reach those communities in a reasonable time. But overall, we almost visit 70% of the country's population, the different communities that added as a 70% of the population in Bolivia. And we also, as you can see on the right hand, we visit almost all the communities that were communities with more than 2,000 inhabitants. So in the next slide, you also can see the same analysis, but at the state level. Bolivia has 9 states. It's divided in 9 states. And it also shows the communities, the amount or the percentage of communities and population we reached on that work. A similar analysis was carried out for population groups and by number of communities visited. So the graph on the left shows the division of 4 population groups, populations greater or communities greater than 20,000 inhabitants, populations that have between 10,000 and 20,000 inhabitants, populations with a range between 2,000 and 10,000 inhabitants, and finally the rural range of the populations between 1,000 and 2,000 inhabitants. As can be seen, basically all the populations with more of 10,000 inhabitants and 90% of the population in the segment between 2,000 and 10,000 were covered. So almost basically all of them. And on the right graph, you can see that we did the same analysis, but now not by population percentage, but by number of communities that we visit. So as you can see, the number of communities between 1,000 and 2,000 inhabitants are much more than the communities in the other groups. And they were also the most difficult to reach because they were, in some cases, very far away. And finally, the same analysis in the next slide was carried out by ecological zone in Bolivia, and divided that the ecological zones in Bolivia are divided between the highlands, which is the altiplano that you can see, the valleys, and also the plains that are called llano. And the plains and the same analysis was done also by population and by communities visited. So what were some findings about the water supply systems in the communities visited? In the next slide, we can see the analysis as a country. The white portion that you can see, almost 11 million of inhabitants. That is the population in Bolivia by 2016. From all the population in Bolivia, the orange portion, or the orange number that you can see there, as mentioned before, was the population that had been planned to visit. But we couldn't reach all those populations. And the blue part that you can see as a light blue portion was the population that was successfully visited. Of this light blue portion, we identified that a small percentage, 1.2 percentage, did not have a drinking water system in the community, although we thought that they had it. So this number was even further reduced when we made the analysis of the population that was effectively served, which is this green portion. So this green portion, you can see that it was reduced, and more than 1 million people who, although they lived in towns that had drinking water system, the water network did not reach their houses. And finally, if we analyze the continuity of the survey, that means households with water 24 hours a day, we saw that of the almost 1 million inhabitants in Bolivia, 11 million, of inhabitants in Bolivia, half of these people did not have access to service with continuity. So as you can see at the beginning, we saw that although our percentage of drinking water coverage were very optimistic, when we go to the core of the continuity and of the good quality of the service, this population reduces by almost a half. So the same analysis was carried out for the 9 states in Bolivia. And the next one, the same analysis also was carried on for the different ecological zones in Bolivia. So we also check in this analysis that the region of the valleys was the region that faces the greatest water stress in Bolivia. Regarding sewerage coverage, we had a similar analysis of the communities visited. 5% of the population assessed did not have a sewerage system in their communities, and 30.5% did not have access to the sewerage system, despite living in communities that had already a system, a sewerage network system. So reducing the number of population served to less than 5 million inhabitants. To the condition of the sewerage system, you can see there the red, the yellow, and the green bars. Only 1.9 million of inhabitants lived in communities where the condition of the sewer system was optimal. The same analysis also was made at a state level. So we have for all the states in Bolivia the same analysis with the state of the sewerage system. And finally, we also made the same analysis by population groups and by ecological zones, as you can see. Finally, we have also the results for the wastewater treatment systems. That was at the beginning our main concern. So of the communities visited, around 5.8 million people lived in communities that had a wastewater treatment plant, but just 3.6 million of these people access to the service. So we have a big gap there when you compare people who actually access to the service, or people who live in a community that has a wastewater treatment plant, but they don't access, they are not connected to the service. And this percentage further diminished when we also counted systems that had up to a secondary or biological treatment. So this 33.5% that we can see, that was our national coverage in wastewater treatment, went down to a 30.5% when we also only assess systems that had up to a biological system. So the same analysis was also made by state as before in Bolivia. And I want to also show you another important finding from the national inventory that was related to the condition and the number of wastewater treatment plants that were found on the visits. So if you go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So you can see on these graphs by state in Bolivia that the total number of wastewater treatment plants that we found were 219. So 219 wastewater treatment plants that we reached during our visits to the different communities, which was a fairly high number that we did not expect, because we were thinking that we had a much less wastewater treatment plants in the country. But we also found that the vast majority of these systems were primary systems and also systems that were not working properly. So at the bottom, you can see that for each state in Bolivia, a big number of wastewater treatment plants didn't have a proper functioning of the plant. And the yellow part is a regular functioning of the plant, and the green plant part is the proper working of the different wastewater treatment plants in the different states. So in addition, it was also found that a high number of wastewater treatment plants were under construction, as you can see on the construction line, and also a lot of them were not working at all. So a big number of wastewater treatment plants were not working at all in all the different states. The same analysis, again, was carried out by population segment. You can see there that the segment between 1,000 and 2,000 inhabitants, which is the rural segment, and also the segment between 2,000 and 10,000 inhabitants, where the segments were, in most of the cases, a lot of wastewater treatment plants were not working as expected. Several reasons were found for which these wastewater treatment plants were not working. In many cases, the main reason was the lack of operation and maintenance that you can see with that number of 49. Which also finally resulted in the clogging and subsequent abandonment of the plant. In some cases, also we found that there were problems in the sanitary sewer system itself. We also found different problems of construction type. So in the construction phase, there were some mistakes made by the wastewater treatment plant in the wastewater treatment plant construction. And well, some wastewater treatment plants that had completed their lifespan or that have different types of problems. Regarding to the technologies found in the wastewater treatments, we have different technologies that we found, and we divided them by group into 4 groups. So we have the anaerobic technologies, the aerobic technologies, the natural-based systems, and also the primary systems. So we found different technologies in these 4 groups. As you can see, in aerobic systems, we only have trickling filters working in our country, so we don't have any activated sludge system, which is a bit shocking maybe for other countries. So in the next slide, you can see that wastewater treatment plants were divided by type of technology, and that we can see also that the number of technologies varied among all these groups, and then that there were a high number of primary systems, which is the 4th bar, mainly septic and in-house tanks, that didn't work properly. So that's why they are in this red and yellow color. And the green ones were the only systems that were working properly if we divided them by type. Regarding to sludge management, which was another element identified was lack of adequate sludge management that could be seen in the different states. This table shows a percentage of sludge that is adequately managed that and reach a final disposal or reuse. For example, if you see in the state of Chuquisaca, although we identified 24 systems with sludge lines, just 2 of these wastewater treatment plants had a management of the system. So the percentage of the systems in Bolivia that make an adequate management of the sludge are very, very low too. And regarding to wastewater reuse, we also saw that the percentage of wastewater reuse in the country was around 16%. In properly working wastewater treatment plants. 8% of this reuse was done just before the wastewater treatment plants, so in the affluent of and we found that there were some kind of reuse downstream. So the data was, I just want to share with you some of the main findings we have. The work was done very extensively, but the most important findings are summarized on this graph. So for the purpose of national planning in the country, the findings were divided in 5 action lines that you can see. 1 line for the infrastructure and another for service management, regulations, capacity building, and social framework. So for infrastructure, we saw that we have a problem with the sludge management in the country. Almost none of the wastewater treatment plants that we visited had an adequate management of the sludge. We found also varied deficiencies of all kinds of types. And also we saw some reuse with and without treatment in the wastewater treatment plants. We also saw for new processes or technology for this, in some cases, the lack of essential elements, such, for example, the preliminary treatment or the sludge line. On the line of the service management, we also saw that the lack of collection of tariffs in the different communities, which directly affects the operation and maintenance costs. we also saw the lack of a trained personnel that work on these wastewater treatment plants, and the lack of proper tools to control the functioning of the wastewater treatment plants. So, for example, we saw that there weren't flow measurement devices at the beginning of the plant, or they almost had zero analysis, the service providers, to analyze the water quality that is going in and out of the wastewater treatment plants. For the regulation lines, we saw that we lack some regulation for monitoring of flows and loads in the country. We also saw design errors that prevent the staff of the wastewater treatment plants from doing their daily work. So in some cases, they even didn't have access to the preliminary treatment. So the screens were blocked and the wastewater treatment was clogging. And there is no coordination at the national, state, and municipal level. There are also only isolated actions that were adding to all the problems that we saw in these communities. And for the capacity building line, we saw that more research in different treatment technologies was needed at different levels of the social framework. Is one of the most complicated works that we have to deal with. We saw a lack of sanitary education, very useful. So advanced. People also need to understand the importance of the payment of a fair tariff, so that also can help for the operation and maintenance and the proper working of the wastewater treatment plants. So with all these findings and all of the different services that I showed you before, in this case by 2018, because we were working already with projected numbers, and we found that our estimations in the rural and urban areas were different of the estimations we made before starting this job. And with all this work, we were also able to define, just the next slide, please. We were also able to define the national strategy for wastewater treatment, which it was the first idea we had. We have, from the Ministry of Environment and Water, we were thinking of doing a national strategy, but we were lacking data. So after all this work, we finally had the data to define national wastewater treatment strategy. That is a sectoral planning instrument to guide actions to address wastewater treatment needs in the country in a 10 and 20-year planning horizon. And that also serves as a unification of criteria in the country and also actions water treatment. So the entire, which is called the National Wastewater Treatment Strategy, is a very extensive document itself. So maybe we will need a whole session just to check on the result of this national policy. But I want to close by showing you some of the progress we made up to date. So we have developed a regulatory instrument that is the Wastewater Treatment Plant Design Guide in Bolivia. That is this technical guide for the selection of wastewater treatment technologies by ecological flora in Bolivia, in order to ensure the minimum quality of the engineering projects that consultancy firms must be submitting for a design of a wastewater treatment plant. We also are on a process of the design of a pilot initiative for household fecal sludge. That is carried out in the city of Santa Cruz de la Sierra, which is also going to develop its own actions and regulations to control the management of on-site systems that will be later extended to a national level. investment programs in wastewater investment programs have been drafted for the construction and rehabilitation of wastewater treatment plants based on the findings of the national inventory. We also had several courses for selection and design of wastewater treatment plants. So we can build this capacity building line in all levels of knowledge. We have the configuration of the Experimental Center for Wastewater Treatment Plant, which is a research center that is being drafted, that will serve for training of operators and also for university studies in Bolivia. And also the updating of tariff and community guides. That we are working also on these social elements, such as the adequate tariff, community guidelines, to ensure and to be sure that the success of the whole strategy and the wastewater treatment projects. So that was all from my side. I hope that this presentation was clear, and thank you very much again for your invitation, and thank you for your time. And if you have questions, of course, I'm up to answer those questions.
Okay, thank you very much to Angela. And if somebody has any question, please do it now, because Angela must leave in a few minutes. Are there any questions? Domande? Okay. It looks like there are no questions, so we thank for this speech our speaker Angela Salinas, and we hope that we can cooperate in the future again, because we are actually working on a project in Bolivia. So thank you very much for your attendance, and hear you soon.
No, thank you very much. I hope that this was clear, and I added to some of the knowledge that you want to share, with Latin American countries. And of course, I will be very interested in how to collaborate or also answer any questions if you have questions later related to the work again. And stay safe, and thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. And now it's time for our second speaker, Denise Rocaservat, professor at the Universidad Pontificia Bolivariana in Medellin, Colombia, and at the School of Social Studies, and she will talk to us about the environmental and the hydraulic and water regulations in Latin America, and also the environmental problems related.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much for the invitation. Hi, everyone. So, because I come from the social science, it's going to be a dialogue of multidisciplines. So I invite you to take notes if there are some concepts or some things that I say that you're not familiar. It will be a very nice conversation to have afterwards. So I'm going to share my presentation. Okay, here. You should be able to see it.
Yes.
Okay, great. So I'm professor in the social science department in Medellin, Colombia. And I'm going to talk about environmental justice and water rights in Latin America. And of course, maybe you think, oh, this has nothing to do with engineering, but as you will see, it will become evident that engineering is a knowledge that is very important in order to resolve many conflicts. So I wanted to start the conversation with these maps. And these maps, the first one is fresh water distribution around the world. And you see that the one that it's the blue, the darker blue are the ones who have more fresh water availability per population. And then the yellow and the orange are the ones that have scarcity, very severe scarcity in the world. So I wanted to point out, probably you all know this already, because this is kind of like the basic map that they teach when they talk about water resources. So you have here in the northern, all Alaska, you have here all this, the pole, the North Pole, full of water. The North Pole is very strategic, and you might have learned that there are many oil projects and gas projects. As a matter of fact, during the Trump administration, when he was the president of the United States of America, he opened the door for oil extraction inside the ocean. So that's going to be very important, because right now there are many mines and extractive projects all around here in the North Pole. They're going to start. And also Russia has been doing this extraction for many, many years. And it has very dramatic consequences to the environment, and also to local people that live, native people that live in all these islands, in all these places, like the Inuit, who live in the borders of what right now we call Russia, what we call Canada, what we call United States. But going into South America, I wanted to point that South America is all blue. It's all blue, and it's very blue because it's going to be a place that it's very important for fresh water availability. And it has to do with the Amazon basin. So the Amazon basin, which is kind of like in the heart of Latin America, is a real rich territory of water, subterranean water, and many species and biodiversity. But it's also severely being under attack. So we have here, we just juxtapose that map into the water risk map. So in the future, what's going to happen with water? So look, even when South America looked like very blue, like it had supposedly availability of fresh water, you see here that the Amazon is the very, very light yellow, which is low risk. That's the low risk, the light yellow. So again, the light yellow here, also look at the North Pole. The light yellow has very low risk of water scarcity. But then you have the red high risk, and the more red, extreme risk. So you have here extreme risks all over the coastal of the Pacific coast, even part of Chile, all Chile, Bolivia, Peru, and then parts of the Patagonia, which are in Argentina. So you see here that the distribution of water is different. It's heterogeneous throughout the territory, but as well, there are other factors that are social that also take into effect. So it's not only a natural disposition, it's also a social economic disposition. For example, in the coast of Peru, where you see here the high risk of water scarcity, in the coast of Peru, you have the incredible monoculture of land agriculture. You have like agriculture for agribusiness. So it's a desert, and in the desert, they have made large amounts of farms and agribusiness. So you see parts that are very green, and they are producing food that's going to be exported to other parts of the world. But you also have in these parts right here, like red in Chile and like next to Bolivia and Peru, you have mining corporations. This is the part of the Atacama Desert that it's the copper belt. It's a copper belt because the Andes comes here with the Atacama region and builds an incredible site of minerals. So you have lots of minerals here, and you have large transnational corporations that are extracting copper and gold and silver. And what do they need? Water. Water is the number one resource you need to produce almost every single thing. Okay? So talking about maps, we continue with the maps. And this map, I recommend you to look. The EJ Atlas, the Global Atlas of Environmental Justice, and it maps all the conflicts, the environmental conflicts around the world. It's a participatory map where you go on the website that I put here down, that you can look at the website. And this website, researchers are mapping every single day new conflicts related to the environment. It could be to water, it could be to air, land, forest, etc. So what I wanted to point out here is also you have so many different conflicts all around Latin America, different environmental conflicts going on. And specifically, you see that the conflicts are on the red part, on the part that was a scarcity. And on the part that I told you that scarcity is not only produced by nature, it's social natural. It's the human being, the anthropo, who is also transforming nature. So you as engineers and we people in the commons every single day transform nature either by building an incredible city, building an infrastructure, transforming the mountains, bringing the water from up in the mountains, bringing it to the city from with lots of tubes. These tubes have to, of course, change the way the territory is, etc. So we have this here, this interesting way of how many conflicts are in the part where it's also water is scarce, but where the main economic production is taking place. This is kind of the main place in the coastal of the Pacific where many large agribusiness are operating. So we have these conflicts, water wars, also called water wars, because we are seeing phenomenon. We are seeing, like, for example, places that are becoming more dry. And scientists saying that this has to do with climate, with that transformation of the climate change. The climate is changing because of what? Well, the majority of the scientists have come up with a concept called the Anthropocene. The Anthropocene. And that means that it's a geological time on Earth where human beings are impacting the climate like never before. Because we are transforming nature in order to produce, consume, and produce things that we buy, and then we waste, and then it's all garbage. And that garbage we cannot get rid of. So every single day we produce something, we have more garbage that we cannot get rid of. Even with the highest, the most incredible technologies, we still have garbage. And this garbage it's in the atmosphere, and it's producing in the atmosphere this transformation of our climate. Okay, so it's, remember again, social natural. It's a hybrid phenomenon. It's not only like nature is not separated from human beings and society. So here you have all these pictures of images of things that are taking place like land dispossession. This image here of a hand is the idea that maybe this land was owned by small farmers in Italy. Very nice, very happy, have this little land. Then comes a multinational corporation and they have to sell the land because maybe nobody wants to really grow any food because they have become dependent on food that brings from China. And they have to sell their land for what? Maybe for constructing a whole entire city, for new buildings, large buildings. So you have land that is being grabbed by large companies that many times the peasants sell it for very cheap money. Then you have, of course, the whole issue of labor, of work, labor. How much are we paying the people who work in these large farms that are supposed to be like the new innovative, efficient farming monocultives? But how much are we paying, for example, the people? What about labor laws? What are their rights? We're seeing more and more, for example, in Peru, we learned after the farmers went to strike. How many of you know that in India right now, there's a large peasant strike because of a law that the government from India wants to put up to transform the whole market and the way the peasants directly sell in the markets their products. Now they all have to sell to an intermediary that will control the prices. So we have all this issue of labor. And then, of course, not only about land, we also have water conflicts. Here, this image here with the red it talks about India. In India, there is a site where Coca-Cola came to build a big, large factory. And when they came to build, the local community started noticing that they didn't have access to water, that water was becoming scarce, So they had also another movement, incredible, to try to say something about, hey, our water now we cannot access it because we have here Coca-Cola who is bringing here to take away our water. So here you have three different books that talk about water conflicts that are very important and that I advise you to read. So one is about the Maud Barlow, who is Canadian and writes about Blue Covenant, the global water crisis, and the coming battle for the right to water. Then you have Karen Baker. She's also a Canadian, and she talks about the privatization of water and what that means for water crisis. And then Vandana Shiva from India, who has a book on water wars that talks about what we are facing right now today as an environmental threat. The threat that we're going to be taking away for our right to water, and that a few, very few people or very few transnational corporations are going to be the owners of water. So talking about that situates us in this phenomenon of the Anthropocene. The Anthropocene is a phenomenon where we human beings are transforming in a rapid phase, very rapidly. We're transforming the environment. So here we see a city. How many of you live in a city? Even Europe. You see, Europe has changed so much. So Europe, before all this globalization, economic globalization and McDonaldization, before Europe used to have smaller cities or many times rural places, but the idea of small cities were very important. Today we're seeing transformation in many regards. For example, in Italy, I don't know why I see every single week a news. Entire little town for sale, €1 the house. So we're seeing this phenomenon of transformation where all the idea of living in small rural communities is transforming very fastly. And we are having these incredible, massive, crazy places we call cities. Very dense, lots of people, cramped. Everyone hears everyone. We're all right now with the virus. We're all contaminated because we live with next door. We have like a whole entire family in this very small apartments. So we're seeing this phenomena of urbanization. All the world is transforming to the urban life. The urban life has many things. It's not only about the buildings. It's also a way of consumption. It's the McDonald's, it's the whole Starbucks, it's the whole American life that we all want to be. So this idea of consumption as well, what do we need? Water. We need water for every single thing, for building the whole cities, to the whole idea of consumption and their products that we use. So this phenomenon is interesting to see it because it's not only in the global south. So many times we thought, oh yeah, that only happens in India, in Peru, in South America, these crazy cities. No. Now you're seeing in Italy, the migration, everyone is migrating to Italy, and you have cities which are incredibly, you have a whole shanty towns, places in the marginals of the cities that are being constructed, people very poor They are trying to live and to find a place to live, to find a place where they have quality of life. So we have this issue around the world. So the issue about the urbanization brings lots of water problems. And I did a research trying to understand what are the problems of waters. So the problem of water is not a thing about the third world countries. The problem of water is everywhere. It's also in the United States. So you have here Flint. Flint is a city, a small city in the United States in Michigan. I don't know if you heard about it. It was a big scandal. People were drinking water from the tap that was contaminated with lead. Okay? And you had these people drinking lead water, and we're dying and we're getting sick of cancer. And they started researching, they started analyzing water, and they found that the water they were drinking was not safe to drink. And they had all these diseases. But then you have in New York as well, all these points here are all, the dots are all the places where water has been contaminated. They have done examinations and tests, and they have identified that water has lead, has problems, that they cannot drink water. So you have here from the United States, you have here from South Africa, from Mexico, from India. In many large places, we are facing problems with water, drinking water, with potability, with it not being contaminated, etc. So what is going on is that we are facing an environmental crisis. And an environmental crisis that we as species, as human beings, are also in debt. We are also related. We have participated. But what we see is that the damage in the whole planet is differentiated. It's not the same. Who suffers more? Who suffers more from a bad environment? You should think, who suffers more from a bad environment? Well, let me tell you, if you have a couple of dollars, you can probably buy a very nice house in a very nice place outside the city, very beautiful, with an air that is more clean, okay? But if you don't have the money, if you are a person that did not have the opportunities to have an education, to have a real good job that pays you well, you have to live where you have to live. And that place could be full of contaminated water, contaminated air. So the environmental justice movement has to do with all the people, the poor people that are usually the people of color, are the ones who are being more affected of living in an environment that is contaminated. So the environmental justice movement is trying to say, hey, there has to be justice also for all these people that are living in a contaminated site, and that also the rich people are the ones who are contaminating with these very large extractive industries. And then they can live good, but all the rest have to live trapped up in toxicity. So these movements around the world, the environmental movement, have trying to put in the agenda the environmental problem that we're facing. So the question is, globally, what has been done? So what has been done globally? Well, in 2010, the United Nations declared water as a human right. This is very important, okay? And Bolivia, because you guys are studying Bolivia, Bolivia was a very important site because there was a large water movement. El movimiento de Cochabamba, las guerras del agua, water wars in Cochabamba. And it was because of privatization in Cochabamba that people put this large movement against privatization. And thereafter, they rallied the world in order for the world to include the Declaration of Water as a Human Right. Then you have sustainable development goals. Maybe you all know, because maybe you're all working for the goal of bringing safe and clear and clean water to the communities. Very important. So supposedly in the year 2030, we need to have brought infrastructure in order to bring more safe water and water treatment plants and everything. So that's the Sustainable Development Goals. Then you have the Integrated Water Resource Management. This is a whole entire tool to work under river basins, and it supposedly has to be integrated. So you have to have a balance between the social, the economics, and the environment. Beautiful, very beautiful in paper. And then you have water governance, and you have principles oriented by the market that maybe you know about. That's called the market-based payments for environmental services. So these are some of the instruments that globally we have come about to face the problems, to face the environmental problems. Unfortunately, it's not easy. It's complicated. Many times they don't work. Many times it's very nice on the paper, but on reality, it's much more difficult and complicated. So what is water? Who is water? Why do we say water is a natural resource? What is this word, resource? What is this word that it's natural? If we are saying that water is not only nature, water is a relationship with human beings. So is water a human right then? What if water was a human right and not a resource only? Is water a market good? You must know that last year, water was introduced in the financialization. Right now, water is being bought and sold digitally on the market. This is something very important because before it was already an economic good, but now the way it's being sold on these marketplaces like in New York and all that gives it another way of thinking about its mercantilization, that it becomes a commodity. But water is also a cultural right. So for example, I don't know if you have heard that indigenous peoples in Bolivia, they are organizing for their water, to defend their water against some maybe large mining projects. But water is also nature, because then you say, hey, but water has its own materiality. Water has its own way of fluidity, its own chemistry, its own physicality. But water is also life, because we, in a way, are water. And everything that we see around us and that we use has had to have water. So in this context, I'm going to talk a little bit about a research project in Medellin, Colombia, where I work and study. This is the city of Medellin. Look at it. Incredible. Again, this social natural landscape that we, the anthropo, have made. So here we see that Medellin is a valley. And in the valley right now, I took this picture. I was standing in one of the mountains. On front of me is another mountain that you cannot see, but you're seeing that little by little, the floor is going up. So this is an altitude, it's going up. There's another mountain. There's two mountains, and in the middle, there's the river. And the river you cannot see, but here, where I'm pointing that has some green, this is a green space in the city. Here, the river runs from north to south, all over next to that green place. So you see here very near where I'm standing taking the picture, this is a new construction neighborhood of migrants that come all over Colombia, that come because they have been displaced. And displacement is violent. They could be displaced of their territories because of an armed actor. There are many armed actors. There's actually a conflict in Colombia going on for many, many years. Even though right now we're in a peace process, eventually there is many other actors that have been now continue to do violent things. But also we have people that have been displaced of their territories because of development projects, because even of dams, talking about engineering, those people who love the ones who are building dams. Well, dams here in Colombia also displace people. And I met many people who lived here who were living in a territory that then they put a large dam for hydroelectricity for the city. So they had to leave that place and come here and build their house. So we have here Medellin, this social natural place. We also understand cities as a metabolism, a social metabolism, where we are transforming nature. So in Medellin is supposed to be a city that it's called very innovative. It has won many awards because they have a very important utility company called EPM. EPM is a utility company. It's a company that provides the service for water service in Medellin. And this company is called Empresas Públicas de Medellin. This company is very profitable. And actually, it's very interesting, the case of Medellin, because Medellin has a very good coverage of water, potable water, drinking water, and of sewage. So it has like 98% of coverage of drinking water in the city. And this is a very high statistic, okay? And also, this company is a transnational Latin American company, so it also has businesses in other parts of Latin America, where the business is in water service, and energy service. So we have this corporation here that is something special from other places, but still we have communities like El Faro. El Faro is a community that is on the borders of the rural and the urban areas of the city. Because I told you, these are people being displaced. They are coming into the city. So you have people building their houses. And they're building in places where actually water does not get there. There's not enough infrastructure. Because you all know as engineers that there are quotas, water quotas. So in the city, there's a quota where water goes until one certain place, but the city keeps on growing. And you have this phenomenon of migration, and the people are continuing to come. So there's places where they're disconnected. So there's two forms of disconnection. There's disconnection because you're living in a place that it's out of the quota of water, but you also have disconnection of the tube and the water system because you cannot afford to pay. So actually in Medellin, the people who don't have water organize themselves in a movement. So you see here part of the people who live in these places. What they do is they self-organize. They self-organize to bring their own water because they don't have water from the public service. So they get together and they have their community aqueducts. So their community aqueducts by which they bring water from a different source. There's actually many watersheds. So they bring water from some watershed and start constructing their own water systems. And they start organizing also to demand their human right. And here, I'm going to put just a little bit of this video so you can see a little bit about the place, so you can have an idea. This is the little watershed next to the community where they get their own water. They have built their community aqueducts and they have put their own infrastructure to bring water from this place into their homes. So these are kind of like the tubes, the infrastructure. So in these places as well, you find, so the social movement is working towards their own autonomy to bring their own water, but you also have this infrastructure. Incredible, look at this. This is part of a program that EPM, the Public Utility Company, built in these very high places in the mountains. These are engineers that very creatively, with lots of creation, try to think, how do we bring some kind of infrastructure to some of the neighborhoods that are very high in the mountains, that's difficult to get there, but we need to put them water because they're demanding, and water is a human right, so we have to bring water there. But it's also very difficult because of the territory, because of the altitude, the physical, the landscape, the geography. So they have this program where they kind of like built this infrastructure that is temporary. It's temporary to bring water, drinking water to these communities as well. So in these communities, you have many types of water. You have water that comes from EPM, but you also have water that comes from the community aqueduct. So in the research, we found many things. We found that the water rights, that the communities are demanding their right to water, and that they self-construct their own neighborhoods. They self-construct and build also their community aqueducts. But we also found out there were multiple waters. There was water from EPM. There was drinking water. There was community water. There was water from the contraband. There was rainwater. There was multiple sources of water. We also found that there were multiple norms. There's not only the norms of the state law. There are also local norms that people have authority because there's somebody in the community that takes care of water. So there's regulations. There are arrangements that people do locally for their waters and their communities. And we also saw the last year exigency versus autonomy. We saw that while some inhabitants and population wanted the state to provide water and wanted EPM, the utility company, to come and build plants and build infrastructure, other people didn't want the state there. They wanted autonomy. They wanted their own rural aqueducts or local aqueducts or community-based aqueducts. And then we also found interesting information about what they thought about responsibility, coverage, access, economy, justice. So we identified global discourse. What is the global discourse about water? What is the global discourse about water? And what are the everyday practices of peoples in the community? So for example, in terms of coverage, the global discourse is that there has to be universal coverage. But locally, people say, well, but not really. We need to coexist with mixed systems because we cannot think there's going to be only one corporation that has the control of all the distribution of water. People were saying we need different owners of water. So it cannot be controlled only in one hand. Then things related to the economy. So people in global discourse, water has a tariff framed on the market economy. But in everyday practice, people are saying that, yes, there is an exchange and a value. There is a value to water, but this value are in agreements that must be made also based on community reciprocity. How much does the water cost? So all these ideas, we found that there was the global discourse, and then we found that there were everyday practices that the people were trying to extend to think about creative ways and different ways about thinking about water that transcend universalization, standardization, and just the marketplace. To think about multiple waters, about reciprocity, about direct democracy, about legal pluralism or different legal norms, etc. So these are some of the ideas I wanted to share with you about environmental justice and water rights. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much for your presentation and your speech. Very interesting. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I don't know if you have questions.
Yeah, let's see. Are there any questions for Professor Roque Servat? Domande? It seems tonight there are no
Very
questions.
Quiet.
Maybe the English is frightening people.
Oh, but maybe they can just do it in Italian and you can traduce.
Anyway, if there are no questions, I have a question. You talked about the problem in Colombia of this multi-utility firm that was, I don't remember the name, but
EPM.
that controls water, energy, and so on. But is this a problem only in Colombia or also in other American countries? And what are the laws about the water management? In which countries the management is public, and in which countries the management is delegated to these private multi-utilities?
Okay, yeah, that's a very good question. So one important thing to start about the ownership of the public utilities. So the idea of public utilities, you have the word public. So the word public right now doesn't mean what it meant before. So I'm going to try to define it. Since the 1990s, globalization, economic globalization, has changed legislation around the world. And you have to know this as engineers because there were structural adjustment programs by international banks like the World Bank and the International Monetary Funds and other banks that give loans to states. And the loans they give for development. So these loans they will give to states in order for states to develop and do modernization projects. Modernization projects. Sounds very nice. So they will give them money, but it was a money that there's a debt. It's a loan. So you start accumulating debt. But the money doesn't come for free. The money comes with regulations that the states have to transform their legal framework. So what happens, for example, in South America, is that all the states in South America have received lots of money from these world banks. And this money came with these kind of like regulations where they had to do reforms. And these were called structural reforms. You had to reform the whole entire economy of the country. So, for example, in Peru, in Colombia, Bolivia, every single place, they had to reform the legislation. Depending on who the government was at that time, because you know there are more governments, there are more left-wing, right-wing. So some of them, but that were more right-wing and they're more neoliberal, they acted very fast in transforming legislation. The transformation meant that the state was no longer a welfare state. The state became a regulatory arm of the market. So the state regulates the market. This also happened in Europe, okay? But you have to know because it's also around the world. So what happened is that with this transformation, you see that in terms of like water, it took place. So the legislation changed because there was no real welfare state. The state became a regulatory apparatus. So the state said, okay, the water, we have to bring water to everyone in the city, but water has to be a commodity. Water has to be regulated. So they created a whole governmental supervisors apparatus that regulates water. In every single place in Latin America, you will find a superintendencia. The superintendencia regulates water, how much in the market, the tariff. So you have the market-oriented principles are the ones that give you the information of the tariff. So any company, public or private, has to adhere itself to the regulations of the market. But not only that, they also have to adhere itself into working as a private corporation. So, for example, EPM, Empresas Públicas de Medellín, is publicly owned because the city of Medellín, el alcalde, the mayor, is supposedly the owner of the company. And it has, of course, a governance structure. And it has as well a CEO that manages the company, but the mayor is supposedly the one who owns it because it's a public owned. But remember, structural adjustment programs, neoliberalization, market-oriented principles are the ones that really are the ones that frame the whole business. So even though it's called public, it has to adhere itself into market-based principles. And that means economic commodity. And that means they have to act as if they were a private corporation. What is the difference? The difference is that the shareholders and the profits that the company gets, the mayor gets some of that big chunk of money, and that money they can use in social programs. So the idea is that the more direct is that the public idea is that there's some money that the profits of the company, they go into the city and the city can use it for many projects. So the city uses, that's why Medellin is also the most innovative, because like I said, this company is successful, so they have profit. So the city has some money to do infrastructure, to do the infrastructure, the modernization of the city, and build stuff and everything. So that's something that's interesting related to this idea of legislation in every single country. In every single country, you have this same neoliberalization of water service. Yes, I hope I answer your question. Hello?
Okay, sorry, I had the microphone turned off. Thank you very much for your answer. Are there any other questions? Otherwise, since it's getting late, we can also close this webinar. And thank you very much for our speaker, to Denise Roca-Servat. And we hope hearing you soon, maybe for other webinars or projects. Who knows? And thank you to everybody in attendance. And